My given name was Alice Louise Hare, H-A-R-E, but I was called Louise, and I was born December 15, 1919, on a farm southwest of Wichita in Viola, Kansas. I just felt like there were a lot of others that I knew in my class that were going in the service, and I thought that it was my duty to help out. And I thought, well, that'll give me a chance to get out of Kansas. Not that I had anything against Kansas. When I knew my brother, just older than I, was going in also. And so since I had nurse's training, I thought that there would be a need for me. Well, my first place was at Garden City, Kansas, which is a primary training base. And I was there for, 2 or 3 months maybe. And then they opened the B-25 bomber field at Dodge City, Kansas. Well, that was closer home than Garden City had been. And I thought, gee, I'm never going to get out of Kansas. There was so many military medical people that had gone in through the Air Force, which I had also. And so they were somewhat overstaffed, and the medical part, the Army part of the service, was very understaffed. So they issued a blanket transfer out of the Air Force, a lot of different bases, for the medical people to be back in the Army again. Well, it was based right by the Huey P. Long Bridge along the Mississippi River, between the Mississippi River and Jefferson Highway. And this was, and then to the little ways west and south, or north it would have been, was the Camp Plauché, P-L-A-U-C-H-E. And it was a staging area and that was why it was called the NOPE, New Orleans Port of Embarkation. And then I can't remember when it was they started getting German prisoners in that area. And when they would need to be ill, why, they would come and we would treat them. One of the first experiences I had was they were taking the prisoners out to work in a sugarcane field one morning in the big GI truck. And they had a wreck. And there were, I think, 2 or 3 of the German boys that were killed. And they brought the rest of them in that were injured, and we had an empty ward. And we opened that up for a triage ward. And as they were treated for different ailments, broken legs and whatever, they would put them on another ward. And after about the 3rd one was taken out and wasn't brought back, I could sense the tension that these German boys were going through. At this particular time, I had a brother 2 years older than I that was in a German prison camp in Germany. And I thought, well, I hope he's being treated okay. But I'm not going to do anything mean to these boys because it might reflect back on him. One of the doctors that was there happened to understand German quite well. And so we kind of thought about it, and I said, well, can I go get one of those boys that's already been treated and bring him back so they can see him? And he said, oh, what a wonderful idea. So I went and got the boy that had a broken ankle, and he was able to be in the wheelchair. And the minute I walked in that door with him, the rest of those boys let out the biggest hoopla. And they were utterly relaxed then, because in their own mind, they thought they were being taken out and shot, which is, in essence, is what they knew would probably have happened in their land. One of the nurses that was in the same nurses' quarters that I was, she refused to take care of any of the German prisoners because she had a boyfriend that was in a prison camp. And like I told you, I had a brother that was in one too. But I always felt like if I mistreated them or didn't take care of them, which was my duty, that it might not be good. Oh, he came out in great shape. And he was fortunate. He was not really mistreated. I can't tell you how long he was in the prison camp. But while I was still in New Orleans, he was transferred back to Austin, Texas. And I remember going over on a 2 or 3 day furlough to see him. Most of them were in their 20s and just like our boys. I mean, they were humans. And one of the experiences that we had with the German prisoners, caring for them, as I told you, they took them out in the cane fields to work. And this one morning, we got this one boy in, Corporal Dorn was his name. And it was the third morning that he had refused to go to work. And they thought he was just gold bricking. And then they realized that he was in some illness. So they brought him in. And the doctors soon realized that he had a lot of fluid in his lungs. And I happened to be the nurse that was helping them. And so they had this big long needle about so long. And when he saw that, he just knew that it was going to be torture. And we had a cross-reference dictionary, German and English. And so I could sense, and I tried to calm him down. And so they went ahead and put the needle in, and out came bloody fluid. So he knew then that they weren't torturing him. I asked the head doctor at the hospital if I could go down and get something for him to do. I said, he's a tailor by trade. And he also had a little girl that was about 18 months old that he hadn't seen yet. And at that time, you could buy little dresses that had the embroidery design stamped on them. So I bought one of those and the thread to go with it, and then I got the thread, and I cannot tell you how many arm patches he sewed on for the nurses and doctors. We kept him busy. One doctor, I told you, could speak German quite fluently, so he would ask him in German. And so after Dorn talked to them, then he would say, well, tell him. The other doctors would say, tell him. So at the end, they said, do you have any more questions? And he said he wanted to know what tell him and ask him meant. And I could not keep from laughing. And they looked at me so funny, like, you know. And I said, well, now listen. All he wants to know is what tell him and ask him means. And so, you know, that gave us all something. And as long as he was in there, invariably, when I'd come in his room, he'd say, tell him, ask him, tell him, ask him. Oh, it was a busy, busy place because there were several staging areas there, and they had a general hospital, too. But no, one of our hangouts was the Roosevelt Hotel, and it was right across the street from the Orpheum Theater. So there would usually be at least two of us girls would go, and a lot of times we dated different fellas and all, and we would go, and then we went down in the French quarters a lot, and then we went out. They had the riverboat Mississippi Queen that went up the river. Can't remember how far, but it made afternoon trips and night trips, and they had dancing on that, and so that was a lot of fun to go on. Well, one Sunday afternoon, there were some of the doctors and us nurses went on a little walk up the river, up the levee, and towards the bridge, and as I told you, maybe I didn't tell you, but a lot of our doctors were from the Bronx area of New York, and they had never, ever been out in farm life. Some of them had never been out of New York, I guess. So it was an eyeful of all they saw. And so this particular day, as we were coming by, the man was getting his dairy herd in to hook up to the milkers. And we were standing by the gate, and it was close enough I was able to catch his attention. And I whispered to him, I said, I know you're getting ready to put the milkers on, but I said, is there a possible chance you would let me milk one of those cows? I said, I assure you, I know how to milk a cow. So he said yes. And so he got me a stool and a bucket, and I sat down there, and I was able to get some milk. We got back while we went to our quarters and cleaned up a little bit, and when I walked in the dining room, these guys said, you should see her. She knows how to milk a cow. And they had never seen a cow, much less a woman milking one.
The Bronx is different.
Well, of course, I went in as a second lieutenant. And about after a year and a half or so, I was promoted to first lieutenant. And I'm sure had I stayed in, I was eligible to become a captain, but I figured 4 years was enough. I wanted to get back to a more normal life. I spent a little time on the farm with my folks, and my youngest brother, who would have been about 18 or so at the time. He was a Down syndrome. And my mother and dad needed to, they wanted to go to Emporia to see her sister, and then on to Illinois to see his sister. So I stayed on the farm with my older brother and David. And so while I was there, I took him into Wichita to see an eye specialist because I was pretty sure he needed glasses. And so can't even think of the doctor's name now. Brownell was his name. Of course, he remembered me from nurses training. And so he treated David, ordered glasses for him and all. And then he said, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'll probably go to work at the hospital where I'd trained. And he said, I need an office nurse here. So the other girls that were in my class that had been in the Army, they were so jealous of me because I got to work for a doctor instead of going back to the hospital where we trained. And then after about a year and a half of working for him, I kind of thought like, well, gee, I'd like to get out of Kansas and see some more of the country. And so he knew some people at the Santa Fe Railroad Hospital down in Albuquerque. And he said that they needed nurses, and he was going down through there. So he took me down there. And then I was there for a year or so, and then I decided that I needed to see some more of the country, so I had a job at Flagstaff. Well, in the meantime, my oldest sister was having a baby, and it was her first one at the age of 40 or 41. And I went into the doctor with her, and in talking with him and all, he said, well, if you're going to be leaving Albuquerque, he said, I know where you can get a job. I know they need nurses. And he's told me up in Cortez. Well, he took me up there. And that's how I got to Cortez. And then one day we got this patient in that had been burned a little bit. I can't remember exactly how. But anyway, it turned out that his sister worked in the kitchen. And it turned out then that Rex and we ended up, after he got out of the hospital, dating. And even before that, I'd visited with his sister, because at the time there were 3 of us nurses lived in some rooms in the lower part of the hospital. And one evening at the supper table, I had gotten a letter from my sister that lived south of Emporia, Kansas, and she sent some pictures of her 2 little kids. And I was just being nice and showing them to Franny. And I said, would you like to see some pictures of my sister? What's her name? And I said, Maxine. And she said, Maxine Kramer? And I said, well, yes. Well, I used to live right beside her. And so it's such a small world. And this was in a little town east of Emporia, Kansas. And then her, when I got acquainted with Rex, and then when they built Cherry Creek Dam here in Cortez, the 2 of the fellows that had the contract to haul the riprap were truckers from Cortez. So Rex and his brother were 2 of the drivers that came up. And so then I came up. We weren't married yet, but he lived with his brother out on South Santa Fe, and I had an apartment in the Jayhawk Motel down on South Santa Fe, and then we got married the 3rd of February in 1949, I think it was. And then after that job was over, we moved back to Cortez, and I worked in the hospital there until after my husband died. And I also worked in the county health department some there. I really enjoyed my work.
When you were at the camp?
Well, I had 3 girls. The oldest one, Nancy, she's 51, I think, and she works at the University Hospital, senior outpatient clinic. And then Linda, the daughter that I live with here, she's been pretty much a wife and house mother, and she's taken care of quite a few kids and all. And then the youngest girl, Peggy, she lives in Greeley. And after my husband died in 1980, I waited 3 years before I left Cortez, and then I decided that I should spend more time with my children. So I came up to to Broomfield and was at the Highlander until, and then when my daughter and Linda and Steve bought this house, I was all set to go into a retirement home. And when they built the Salvation Army, built the Silvercrest in Broomfield, I had Steve and Linda come with me for the interview. And about a week later, Steve said, "Granny, we want to take you out for dinner." And so that was when they came up with, they said, "We're planning on buying a house and letting our daughter live in our double-wide trailer in Lafayette, and we want you to be a part of our family." So that was right at 3 years ago. And so Peggy at first was in Sterling. She worked for the Sterling Journal for a while, and that's where she met her husband. But they've lived in Greeley for some time now. And she's a school teacher, and he works at the beef plant up there, the Montford beef plant. I was in on the ground floor of that senior center. I was on the board for. We've gotten a lot of compliments on it, and when we started having we raised, the seniors had a lot of dances around raising money for that senior center.